I want to ask you about Israeli society pre-October 7th. In the characterization of it, we've definitely heard Israeli officials or former Israeli officials refer to it as an apartheid system. What is your sense of that, and explain why or why not you would consider it an apartheid system for people who aren't familiar with the dynamics in Israel?
According to the definition of apartheid by the Rome Convention and some other resolutions, it is obvious. Obviously, there is an apartheid system in the West Bank, and even in East Jerusalem, because there are literally and formally two systems of laws, and discriminatory one, of course. So. By definition, again, according to the Rome Convention, especially, which, as far as I remember, gave the most profound definition of apartheid, there is apartheid goes on in the West Bank for many years, not only under this government, under other governments. By the way, it's ironically the former government failed specifically because they wanted to cling to the apartheid system. And if you would like me to explain in further detail, please. I will. But so the former government, which called itself, in retrospective, perhaps I cannot say, I cannot say cynically, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But the former government wanted, or let's begin another way. There are two systems, even more than two systems of laws in the West Bank. In general, the Palestinians are subjected to military rule and laws, including, for instance, courts. And the Israeli Jews who live in the West Bank are settlers. They are subjected to civic law and courts. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are places in which Jews are allowed to enter, Palestinians are not. There are even specific roads, to Palestinians separately than for Jews. And by the way, as you remember probably the very famous verdict of the court in the United States in 56 or 53, the Brown versus Board of Education. So remember the court in the States dictated that or ruled that there's nothing like separate but equal. Right. So same here, of course. So so there is an apartheid. The apartheid goes on for sure. Now, according to the Israeli law, every 5 years the Knesset has to renew those regulations of apartheid. They are formally entitled the Judea and Samaria regulations or rules. I prefer to call them the rules of apartheid. Every 5 years, they must be renewed by the Knesset. And in the last Knesset, the coalition didn't have the majority to renew those rules because one member of the coalition refused to vote in favor of the extension of those rules. So if they stayed in power, those rules would have been revoked automatically. The only way to renew those rules was by dissolving the Knesset. So the government preferred to dissolve itself in order to keep the apartheid rules.
Because otherwise, had those rules expired, the Palestinians living in the West Bank would have been subject to civic laws.
No, quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. The settlers would have been subjected to military rules. And by the way, that meant that members of the Knesset and ministers of the former government who are settlers would have not been able to be members of the parliament and the government because they would have been referred to as aliens.
Interesting. All right. Lastly, what do you think? What is the way forward? I mean, how do you imagine? And I imagine it's difficult to imagine. but what is it? What is the way forward, both from an idealistic sense, but also from a pragmatic sense? Like, is there a way out of this?
Look, ideally, I would embrace John Lennon's Imagine song that imagine there are no countries.
Right.
And I said that as someone who doesn't like the Beatles, by the way. But I'm a heavy metal guy, so what to do. But anyway, that's ideally. Unfortunately, it's not particularly relevant and topical at the moment. But I think that the balance between the ideal and the practical or realistic is this two-state solution. There's no other way. By the way, I always say that once a Palestinian independent state is established, perhaps in the future, upon consent of everyone involved, there is a chance to, transform the two states into a confederation, federation, one state, together with Jordan, without Jordan, upon consent of everyone. But at the moment, the only way to allow the Palestinians to enjoy their imminent rights, national self-determination, and to stop the bloodshed is by establishing a Palestinian sovereign state in the all territories that Israel occupied in June 1967. That means Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, alongside the state of Israel. And of course, we also support the democratization of the state of Israel proper. Israel cannot continue to cling to Jewish supremacy. We oppose any kind of supremacy. It's not that we want to change it into another kind of supremacy, but democracy, that's basic, of course. Democracy is based on equality. It is an egalitarian modern democracy. I'm not talking about the Athenian one. Modern democracy is based on the principle of equality. When as long as Israel clings to policies which are by definition anti-egalitarian, it cannot be entitled as a democracy. So there's a twofold future that should be realized. Two states and democratization of the state of Israel for the sake of both peoples. The Israelis and the Palestinians, Arabs and Jews, we are all entitled to live in security and prosperity. No way to achieve that as long as occupation and racism dominate.
That's well said, and we should say, that realistically probably has an asterisk. We just had the Knesset, my understanding is, vote against the idea of
99 out of 120 members of the Knesset voted against the apparent one-sided recognition of a Palestinian state, and I emphasize that it is an apparent one or seeming one, because it's not something like that really doesn't exist. But it shows that those who pretend to be an alternative to the fascist government of Netanyahu are not exactly an alternative.
Ofer Cassif, member of the Israeli Knesset, representing the Hadash coalition. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And
my pleasure.
And good
Thank
luck.
You.
We appreciate your the work you're doing and the courage it takes.
We keep doing that.
All right.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.